We're now going to talk about nature, nurture, and human diversity. An important question to ask is, in what ways are human beings the same? If psychologists are looking for universal principles, there has to be something about human beings that's basically the same. Of course, just as interesting is what makes them different. How are you similar to your siblings, yet obviously you're very different? What role do genes play in determining who you are? We'll call that nature. What role does environment play in determining who you are? We're going to call that nurture. Finally, how do genes and environment interact or influence each other? We'll call that nature times nurture. Next, we're going to have a quick review on how genes work. Now I want to talk about our biological blueprint. Contained in the nucleus of each of the trillions of cells in your body are chromosomes. The exception to this rule are mature red blood cells, which lose their nucleus and therefore don't have any chromosomes in them. It's a good thing because we need red blood cells to actually give to other people. Genes are contained in a coiled chain of molecules called DNA, deoxyribonucleic acid, DNA. It's a complex molecule that contains the genetic information that makes up the chromosomes. It has two strands forming a double helix, held together by bonds between pairs of nucleotides. Little segments of the DNA, therefore, comprise the genes. Let's talk a little bit more about genes. You recall they're a small segment of DNA that are capable of synthesizing a protein. These proteins, in turn, direct physical development, maintain the body, and in fact, we couldn't live without this synthesis of proteins. Genes are biochemical units of heredity that make up the chromosomes. We have about 30,000 or so genes. Not so long ago, we thought we had many more genes than that, and that was a bit of a surprise when we started studying the human genome. Plants, for example, easily have 100,000 genes, but it's not clear that they are actually more complex creatures. The genome is the complete instructions for making an organism. It consists of all the genetic material in its chromosomes. We are now just beginning to understand the human genome, as well as the genomes of many important laboratory animals and other creatures, such as the chimpanzee. So you can ask the question, how do genes operate? One of the most important things to remember is that genes change, they mutate. We share about 99.9% of our DNA with fellow humans. The small variations that do occur, let's call them mutations, they are passed on to subsequent generations. It's this tiny 1/10 of 1%, along with environmental differences, that produces the amazing diversity of humankind. Genes have complexes. Well, not like we might have complexes. Human qualities and traits are influenced by groups or complexes of genes, rarely just one. And this, of course, makes identifying the causal root of things like diseases very difficult because there's rarely just one gene responsible. Predicting disease or a trait such as intelligence is therefore a very complex and challenging process. Another surprising thing about genes is that they turn on and off. Genes don't really operate all the time. When turned on, they provide the code for making proteins for our body. For example, the size of your head is really determined by genes. It's a good thing they turn off on time, or else you would have a gigantic head. Or possibly they turned off too early, and then you would have a little tiny head. In fact, the same gene that determines the head of a chimpanzee is the one that determines our head size. Some genes turn on and turn off more than once. Usually, they're serving a slightly different function, even though they may code the same protein. Genes interact with the environment. Identical twins, if you think about it, never end up being perfectly identical. They have individual differences. They even come to look a little bit different. And this is the example that probably is easiest to point to, that genes interact with environment. There is the well-known study of a rice plant that when the water is too high, switches on a gene that allows it to grow up so that the rice part of the plant is not underwater. Rich or poor environments can affect genes switching on or switching off, and so you can get a pretty rich interaction between nature and nurture. We're going to draw some conclusions. First of all, genes have a profound influence on who we are and even how we behave. The second conclusion is that environment plays a powerful role too. Starting with the experience of the womb, all the way to cultural influences, we're also a product of our experience. Finally, we must remember that neither genes nor experience is destiny, but the interaction of nature and nurture surely is.